name is Damian Gillis, and I'm a documentary filmmaker and media producer, and I'm coming to you from my home in Campbell River in Liquitat territory on Vancouver Island. I spent much of my adult life living in downtown Vancouver, where, among other things, I owned and operated an affordable housing building and was proud to work with the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation at that time to renovate and improve the quality of life for our tenants while capping rents. But I was very aware of the challenges for affordability that surrounded me throughout the community. And when it came time for me to raise a family of my own, I decided to move back to Vancouver Island where I grew up, and that was very much motivated by the affordability challenges of Vancouver. So I have some personal familiarity with the issues that we're talking about here today, but we're very privileged to be joined by some of the leading experts from the Lower Mainland and as far afield as Finland and Austria to tackle an issue that affects us all. The Canada West Forum Society is a nonprofit, citizen-led organization encouraging informed, nonpartisan civil dialogue. We convene public forums featuring recognized experts, engaging in thoughtful discussion and open exchange of ideas. Today, we turn to the interconnected challenges of housing unaffordability and homelessness. In 2024, Statistics Canada reported that nearly 40% of Canadians were very concerned about their ability to afford housing. Even households with above average incomes find themselves priced out of homes in the communities where they work or hope to live. For Canadians with limited incomes, the consequences can be severe. When affordable housing is unavailable, homelessness becomes an ever-present risk. Our first guest is Juha Kahaila, Head of International Affairs at the Y Foundation, Finland's largest nonprofit housing provider, and a leader in ending homelessness. Juha will be followed by Martin Orner, Head of Austria's Federal Housing Department. In large part due to its housing policies, Austria is ranked among the world's most livable countries. Tina Atva, Director of Community Planning and Housing at the District of North Vancouver, will discuss the challenges local governments face as they work to expand affordable housing supply and reduce homelessness. Former Vancouver City Council member Jean Swanson has spent decades advocating for people living in poverty. She will speak about the factors causing homelessness and the need for dignified, non-market housing with rents affordable to those on exceptionally low incomes. And last but not least, our fifth panelist is UBC Professor Patrick Condon. In his book, Broken City, he examines the root causes of housing unaffordability, particularly the role of land speculation in widening social disparities and driving up costs. Professor Condon argues that we can and should build cities that work for everyone, not just those with the deepest pockets. In a moment, we'll hand the baton to Juha, but just to give you a sense of the format for today, each speaker is going to be allocated a time to make an initial presentation under 10 minutes. I'll give you a heads up if we're getting close to that time, and then we'll circle back and give everyone a couple of minutes to make additional comments building on their opening presentation or touching on some of their fellow panelists' comments. And then we'll have some time for some open dialogue between the panelists, and we'll conclude with some questions from the audience. So you'll be encouraged to submit those questions, and Gary Gumley will help us by gathering some of those questions and passing them on to the panel members. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion today about an issue that affects us all. So we'll begin with Juha. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation, and good evening from Helsinki, Finland. And I promised myself I wouldn't mention ice hockey, but I have to because I rooted for you guys for Canada, and unfortunately, US took the gold medals. But yeah, good game for sure. Yes, I will try my best to share the screen right now. I hope you can see my slides.
Yep.
Yes, and housing first in Finland and in Europe. So under 10 minutes, here we go. So my name is Juha Kahila. I'm the head of the international affairs here at the Y Foundation. And what we do at the Y Foundation is that we build state-subsidized affordable homes targeted for low-income people and for homeless people. At the moment, we have a housing stock. There is 19,006 apartments, but actually today we are closer to 20,000 apartments all around Finland. So we build everywhere. We have two different kind of housing streams. So Y homes, which we have over 7,500, are the apartments we actually buy from the private market, and then we rent those for people with low income or for homeless people. And then the M2 homes are the buildings we build from the scratches. So we build the whole apartment buildings, and those we have today a little bit over 12,000 apartments. And we have been around since 1985, so we are already a middle-aged organization. But I have to mention that we do many other things besides building as well, even though that is the main thing we are known for. But we do a lot of other things, and then I'm really proud, especially our research team. So we have 5 full-time PhD researchers doing all kinds of research around homelessness, housing first, affordable housing in overall, but also things like green transitioning and carbon neutrality, which are really important for us. Then we do a lot of advocacy work in Finland, of course, but globally as well. So in a strategy, there's a quite ambitious spearhead goal to end homelessness in Finland, but also reduce it globally. So that's a big task for me, for sure. At the moment, 4th largest landlord in the whole of Finland, non-profit organization. And then, yeah, that's in a nutshell what we are doing. Before going to housing first and homelessness, I think we need to talk about social housing in Finland, because social housing, homelessness work, and housing first goes hand in hand. So 13% of all the housing stock in Finland, approximately 400,000 apartments, are state-subsidized affordable homes. That number can be low if you come from Austria or Netherlands, or that can be really high if you look it from Canada or from US. But what we have done is that, like I said, we target those apartments mainly for people with low income and homeless people. So they have full access into this affordable housing stock. And then we also try to balance the buildings to have a nice social mix of different kind of peoples from all areas of life. One of the great things is that in the biggest cities, and when there's a new living area coming by, 25% should be state-subsidized affordable housing. The big cities have committed to that goal. And the good thing in Finland is that the cities, they own most of the land by themselves. A good example is the capital Helsinki, and they own over 70% of the land by themselves. So of course it helps when planning these kind of things, when you can actually do the zoning policy by yourself. So homelessness in Finland, as you can see, the decrease has been quite good. So in the 80s, we had over 20,000 homeless people on the peak days, and now the number is a little bit over 4,500. From 2010 until 2023, the number of homeless people went down 12 consecutive years. But we've had this right-wing government for the past 3 years, and they have made some horrible decisions considering and also cutting the social benefits, defunding some of the NGOs and so forth. So that's why, unfortunately, for the past 2 years, the number of homelessness has also risen in Finland. But here you can see that we have been doing rather well in the past years. And here is just to visualize the change from the 80s. So it has been a quite drastic change. And this is something I'm really proud of, that we have actually almost ended homelessness for families. So under no circumstances in Finland, if you are under 18, you end up on the streets, in a shelter, or in a temporary accommodation. We want to break the inheritance of homelessness. And if a family is about to be evicted for whatever reason, the landlord has to notify the social services, and the social services must act and make sure that the family is rehoused immediately. That's how we do it here, and that's something I'm really proud of. With the housing first, we started 2008. And then unlike in many other countries where the NGOs and organizations try to advocate and lobby the government to start housing first, in Finland it was actually a government decision to go all in with the housing first. So actually the government had to lobby the NGOs and small and cities to start doing housing first. And then I'm really happy that the politicians back in the days, they were bold enough to go all in. So we didn't start with pilot project here and pilot project there, but we actually changed the whole system, how we work on homelessness. And that has really paid off. So I would argue that since 2008, we've had the political will to end homelessness. And even though this government has made some horrible decisions, still in their government plan, there is the goal to end long-term homelessness by 2027. We'll see how that plays out. But of course, there's always the next elections. But unfortunately, the homeless people, they don't have time to wait. So that's why we are trying to advocate and lobby the government that they should take some of the decisions back. So this is what we actually did. So we moved from the old staircase model into the housing first, meaning that we didn't build more shelters, more temporary accommodation and call it a day. Because if you end up doing only that, building more shelters and temporary accommodation, you will run out of money. And it's not a human way to do the work, because housing should be a human right. So what we did is that we actually renovated most of the existing shelters and temporary accommodation into permanent homes for people, with on-site support available if and when needed. Then we put resources into prevention work. So actually when people were struggling to pay the rent or have any other kind of issues related to their housing, there were housing advisors to help those people to go on with those challenges in their life and to make sure that they wouldn't get evicted. So now when we are actually putting resources on housing and support and prevention, at the same time while doing the right thing, we are also saving money. So we have done some studies in Finland and the studies show that we are saving anything between 5,000 to 15,000 euros per person per year when they are living in their own home with adequate support instead of living on the streets in a shelter or temporary accommodation. This is the Finnish housing first in a nutshell. And unlike in many other countries, the Finnish model is designed for anyone facing homelessness and for those who are on the edge of becoming homeless. Because like I said, we changed the philosophy, how we see the homelessness. And so it's a holistic approach, how we do the work. And then these 6 points, I will highlight a couple of them. So number one, different permanent housing options. So we always have permanent housing options. People sign normal rental agreements for unlimited time. They live either in the scattered housing or then in these renovated shelters, which now have individual apartments, small apartments, and with on-site support. So we have been bold enough to try different housing solutions because we feel like one-size housing does not fit for all when it comes to this work. Tailor-made support as long as needed. And we have also included number 4, the preventive work inside housing first, because we feel strongly that those things has to go hand in hand to make the best effort on this work. And then low threshold work activities. The reality is that quite many people who have been homeless for a long time, it's been a while since they have been on a work life, or they might have been dropped out of school. So that's why we have integrated these low threshold work activities so people can start doing small work, very flexible, 1 hour a month, 1 hour a week, 1 hour a day, 5 hours a day, 5 times a week. So it's up to people themselves, and they get a little bit of money while doing the work. That's all from Finland. And now in Europe, I only have a couple of slides from Europe. Europe has been doing, it depends what lens you are looking at it, but there are some good things happening in Europe as well. The reality is that Finland has been the only country where the number of homeless people have been going down in the past decade or so, and elsewhere the numbers have been going up, unfortunately. It's a small scale. That's the truth. So I think that sometimes working in this housing first and homelessness bubble, that might become a shock for some of the people. But OECD 2022, they reported that only 6% of European cities are using housing first. And using housing first can mean that they have a pilot project for 10 tenants, for example. So it's still a really, really small scale thing in Europe. But there are also bright side happening at the moment. So from a EU side, there's more talk than ever on homelessness and affordable housing. We just got the newly released affordable housing plan from EU. We have anti-poverty strategy, which includes homelessness and housing first to the table as well. So there's more talk and discussion than ever, but now we need to change those talk and discussions into action, because at the end of the day, action is the only thing that will end homelessness. And then Denmark and Austria, I'm happy that there's a colleague from Austria here today, because I think Denmark and Austria have promising national strategies, and then they will do a good job in the future for sure. We just need to see how they will develop with those programs.
That's a wonderful segue. You're doing my job for me here, Juha. We're gonna thank you very much for those. There's so much we can learn from that. You're making both a business case and a humanitarian case for the wonderful work you guys are doing there in Finland.
As always.
So we're gonna take your lead and pass it off to your European colleague here, Martin Orner.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I'll share my slides too. Hope you can see that.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Okay, short introduction. I'm the head of the Housing Strategy Department in the Austrian Federal Ministry for Housing. That may sound a little bit odd, but it's the first Federal Ministry for Housing ever existing in Austria. It exists since April last year. Established by Vice Chancellor Andreas Barber, head of the Social Democratic Party in Austria, which is in a coalition with two other parties. And my department is in operation since a few weeks, actually, with a small team of experts. And our tasks are the coordination of national and international housing politics. We have to put forward housing legislation, and we are going to develop a national housing strategy. And for this reason, also doing some housing research. These are the main points. And we also have to do a lot of the things you have mentioned on the European level. I'll give you a short overview of the social housing system in Austria, and then I will go to the Viennese model. Social housing in Austria mainly consists of limited profit housing associations. These are private companies which are voluntarily submitted to very strict legal rules, with a set of rules for government oversight and control, and also independent auditing. And their building activities are usually supported by state subsidies, by loans in most places. Historical roots of this movement are the cooperatives, which were more or less self-aid organizations in the 19th century. What are the basic principles of the system? Most important, it's a cost rent they are charging to their tenants. Rents are not allowed to be above the costs that are incurred to production, financing, and so on. There's a small opportunity to make profits for these companies, but they are only allowed to give these profits to their owners to a very small extent. The rest has to be invested in housing again. So it's a kind of revolving funds model. Equity is tied up in the companies, and since this model exists for a very long time, these companies have built up a lot of equity, put it into housing. They manage around 1 million apartments in Austria at the moment. It's almost a quarter of all primary residence households. And they own themselves around 700,000 apartments, which is 17% of all households in Austria. If you compare the level of rents in the sector, on average, we have at the moment €8.50 per square meter and month. In the private sector, €11.60. This was the core of the Austrian model. In Vienna, we have another thing in addition to this model. We have, coming from the era of the so-called Red Vienna, that was the era between 1919, after World War I, and 1934, when Social Democrats were banned and put into prison. on the ideological basis of Austro-Marxism. And in this area, in the years 1925 to 1934, the Viennese government built more than 60,000 apartments, which was really amazing for this time. And very interesting is how did they finance this model? They financed this by taxing the rich. There was a dedicated housing tax, which was highly progressive and was really aimed at the richest people in Vienna. And they also supported this system by strict rent controls for the private sector. The result was high quality apartments at really low prices. An average working class household didn't have to spend more than 4 to 8% of their household income for housing, which is compared to our times now, it's really astonishing. Nowadays, City of Vienna owns 220,000 apartments. This program was continued after World War II, and together with almost the same amount of apartments by LPHAs in Vienna, almost half of the Viennese population lives in social housing. But you have to consider that social housing in Austria means a little bit a different thing from social housing in other countries, because social housing is not only dedicated to the lowest income groups, it's dedicated to a very broad target group, it's very strongly middle class orientated, and it's a system of state provision for big parts of the society and not only for the poorest parts of the society. But we also have an affordability crisis, as in many other European countries and cities. Austria has especially seen sharp rent increases since the financial crisis 2008. In Austria, not only way above the inflation, but also above average of European countries, as you can see in this graph. Of course, from a lower level than in other countries, but still a big problem in Austria. And what you can see here is the difference between the sectors. We have quite reasonable rents in the LPHA sector and in the public sector, which is basically the Viennese sector. And if you compare that to the for-profit sector, there's a big difference. And the difference is even bigger if you look at newly built apartments since around the financial crisis in 2008. Here you can see, for example, that the average rent for apartments built since 2011 is in the for-profit sector more than 14 euros, and in community buildings, in municipal buildings in Vienna, 6 euros. Yeah, that's a big difference. The reason for that is that especially between 2015 and 2022, an extremely high amount of new apartments was built by these for-profit sectors that pushed the LPHAs out of the market. Their market share has decreased. And of course, if you build expensive apartments, you get high rents. And so we have also, the problem how to solve this affordability crisis, as in many other cities and countries, due to this lack of affordable housing. Even in Austria, where we have a lot of affordable housing, we have not enough, especially considering demographic tendencies. What is the way out? One way is social housing also for middle class. We have to build more social housing also for average earning people. We have to put in place rent regulation again. We had it until the 90s. This system was very much changed during the last decades. So also the private rental market has to be considered. And we have a few things in place in our current government program that should, where we hope we get results from it. We have already enforced a Rent Stop Act. We are at the moment negotiating a reform of the tenant laws, but we also have the challenge of decarbonizing the housing stock. And we intend to give property owned by the state only to social housing anymore and not to private companies. And what is, of course, a very important issue is supporting our existing Housing First program. Last slide, especially concerning homelessness. Why do we have homelessness? As Peter Marcuse said, it's not a failure of the system, it's an issue of the system. Because housing isn't just a commodity like everything else, it's a special thing. And housing markets work completely different from other markets. If we go back to the theory of rent and analyze it and apply it to our housing situation, we can learn that landlords are able to set the rents more or less like monopolists, and they, of course, want to increase their profits, and that kicks out poorer people of the housing market. And if there's no state support, they just get kicked out and don't have a home anymore. So that's in very short terms the basic principle of housing markets and the reason why we produce homelessness. So, of course, we have programs in Austria. We have an eviction prevention program nationwide and a Housing First program to combat homelessness. But the real reasons are behind that. The real reasons are these mechanisms on the housing markets, and we have to tackle these issues if we want to be successful in fighting homelessness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I'm going to go straight over to Tina.
Great. Thank you so much, Damien. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting the District of North Vancouver, Canada West Forum to be part of this session today. I am a municipal planner working here in the district, and I have also a few slides that I would like to share. My name is Tina Atfa. I'm the Director of Community Planning and Housing with the District of North Vancouver. Just want to start off by saying the district is one of 5 jurisdictions on the North Shore of Vancouver. It includes the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, the Squamish Nation, West Vancouver, and the City of North Vancouver. Altogether, this area north of the City of Vancouver has about 200,000 people. The community I work in has about 100,000 people. All right, these are the topics that I'd like to just really briefly as well talk about today. Some of the context around homelessness and policy that we as municipal planners work with, some of the good things that I have been seeing, and some challenges as well. This photo here is of one of the town centers in the District of North Van. If you live here and you haven't been here, welcome you to come over. There is new market rental housing, new affordable housing, as well as other housing types as well. The policy context for housing, it seems to permeate all the work that municipalities do, and certainly amongst planners. We get our direction from the provincial government. That's why I have a photo of the provincial legislature up at the top there. The right-hand side is the table of contents for the Local Government Act. Hopefully you will never have to look at it, but we look at it all the time. It tells us what we can do and what we must do. So from official community plans to housing needs reports, to poverty reduction strategies, regionally, the goal for more diverse housing and more affordable housing really shapes the work that local governments do. This is a little bit of a personal touch, if you will, of some of the planners, housing planners that I work with. I will say that in the last 10 years, I think planners have been focusing a lot more in the housing field. Partly because of the crisis and the need, partly because of directions from senior governments, also because our communities and councils are understanding the need and the lack of affordable housing and the impact that it has on our communities. Affordable housing, wow, the definition typically used in Canada, if you're paying less than 30% of your total pre-tax household income on all your shelter costs, that's considered to be affordable. And maybe when we come to the discussion later on, I noticed that there's a a big difference in Vienna, for example, in the amount of that's being paid for housing. We look at the difference between renters and owners and some of these statistics on the right-hand side. Although that renters make up about a quarter of the households in the district of North Vancouver, many more of those renter households are in core housing needs. So that means the housing is they're either paying 30% or more for their housing costs, or it's not suitable, or it's not adequate, essentially meaning the size is not correct or right for the size of the household, or the building's not in good condition. We also look at median rents, and every fall, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation puts out average median rents and a lot of information that we use to benchmark. And here's a photo of a housing continuum. This one is from CMHC, but there are others that are commonly used in the municipal world and elsewhere to look at trying to meet provide a range of housing opportunities across these different types. Point in time homeless count last year, March, so just about a year ago, the count was done for Metro Vancouver, and it showed a total of 5,200 homeless individuals counted on over a 24-hour period. That was a 9% increase from 2 years ago. And I think this Metro Vancouver total is higher than the total amount in Finland, if I saw Juha's graph accurately. This image on the right-hand side is the one shelter on the North Shore. It's managed by Lookout Housing and Health Society, has 45 shelter beds, but also transitional housing units up above. Okay, here's some good things to share. This is a project that we hope will be under construction this year. This is the East Keith Supportive Housing Project. For those of you who live locally, when you come across the Ironworkers Memorial Bridge and you start to go up the cut up the highway, in that area, you can't see it from the highway, will be this new building, the corner of Mountain Highway and East Keith Road. This is a project that is for homeless individuals or those who are at risk of homelessness. This went through a record marathon public hearing a couple years ago, 5 nights, stretched over many months. There were many, many people opposed to this project and many who gave their heartfelt stories about why it was needed here in the district and on the North Shore. After hearing everybody, our council voted unanimously to support this. And I must say that that was one of the highlights of my working career so far, to see this project get to that stage. It also has 5 complex care units for individuals with complex needs. It's funded partly by BC Housing, $30 million plus in capital. Will also take about $3.5 million a year in operating costs. We have other projects in the works on the left-hand side, on the screen here, and on the right-hand side, our libraries in the city and in the district of North Van have a program called Open Door Community Hub, where individuals, they may be sheltered or not, but can come for some camaraderie, some programs, and some refreshments. The main program I want to mention here is the one in the middle, the Navigators program. This is run out of the North Shore Neighborhood House. Started a couple years ago with a grant from the province during COVID time. And what it consists of really is just a couple staff who give free and low barrier help to individuals who need help accessing essential services. I'll share one short story of a man named James. This was publicly available, this story. James was 54. He had been homeless for about a decade, was having trouble finding stable housing. So he turned to the Navigators, who helped him get documents like birth certificates. And that helped made a difference in getting housing for James. And last point about the Navigators program, although it was funded for a relatively short period of time, both the city of North Vancouver and the district of North Vancouver have committed annual core funding to keep this program going. It's located in the city of North Vancouver, but benefits the North Shore. Challenges takes land, and it takes money and time and courage to see affordable housing, to think about it and to see it come to fruition. And I mean this on everybody's parts, from not only government, but community members, the private sector, nonprofits, I noticed that there are a couple members of the housing task force the district had a couple years who are on the participant list. They are also keeping everybody in council to task to continue to move this work along. Budgets, I gave you an example of how much it costs to build. I'm sure that's not a surprise to anyone, but we know that budget priorities can change, and we are seeing that in British Columbia right now. Temporary housing options need permanent housing options. This one example from Victoria is going to close its containers right across from Royal Athletic Park. Communities, homelessness on the North Shore is often hard to see because of the mountains and the forests and the parks. When communities start to see the impacts, for example, this article here from last week regarding RVs parked in one part of the community, our council starts to hear about that and wants to continue to make sure that we take some action. You can take a look at this on our website if you'd like to see more. This is a tracker that we create every time we meet with BC Housing. It tracks the 4 projects on district-owned land at the moment. I'm just showing this to show how long it can take from the beginning. These are the colored bars right to the end, which is the purple bar, which is the end of construction period. Projects can take 5 years, 4 years, 8 years. And meanwhile, as one of the speakers said, homeless individuals cannot wait. This is my last slide of substance. A couple other examples of housing diversity. On the left-hand side, these blue balconies on a building called Salal. If you're coming over the Ironworkers Memorial Bridge and you look to the left, you can see these blue balconies right behind the bus exchange. This has a mix of housing, low to moderate incomes. It has shelter rates, and it also has a portion of units, 90 units altogether, a portion of units that are geared to the income of residents. On the right-hand side, this image on Old Dollarton. If you come off the bridge and you go to the right, you get to the Maplewood community. It's on the east side of the Seymour River. This is a large private sector development with a mix of strata, market rental apartments, as well as non-market apartments, essentially replacing some existing affordable rental. Diversifying single-family neighborhoods, we hear a lot about that. The last image I'll just highlight on the right-hand side is a building of a multiplex under construction in Burnaby. Certainly municipalities have been working to provide a variety of housing stock, but we know in British Columbia, the province is pushing us that way. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your interest. I hope I was able to share something of use to you. Apologies for those little technical glitches at the beginning. Look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Tina. And now moving across the Ironworkers Memorial to Vancouver here, we're going to hand it off to Jean Swanson.
Hi, everyone. So it's just me blabbing. I don't have a PowerPoint, but hopefully it'll be interesting. So I'm with the Carnegie Housing Project. We're a project of the board of the Carnegie Community Center Association. And we operate in the downtown east side of Vancouver, which is sometimes known as the poorest postal code in Canada. We idolize Finland and Vienna and wish our governments would consider housing and homelessness affordability as important as those 2 places do. In our country, the issue is not that we don't know what should be done, it's that there's no political will to do it. I sometimes say that I've got a callus on my forehead from banging it up against a brick wall. So our housing project does research about housing policy and organizing low-income folks and allies to work on ending homelessness. Recently, we helped organize about 300 speakers to sign up to speak at City Council about a rezoning that gentrifies the downtown east side, ignores homelessness, and reduces the amount of social housing that low-income folks can afford. We have over 2,000 folks with no fixed address just in the downtown east side, plus more who aren't on social assistance, like seniors and immigrants. So over 2,000 homeless just in our neighborhood. And we also have about 6,500 units in the single room occupancy hotels that need replacing because they're tiny, they don't have bathrooms or kitchens, and they're vulnerable in earthquakes. Welfare and disability pensions provide about $500 a month for rent for a single person. A senior on a basic pension gets about $2,000 a month, so they can afford about $600 in rent. So people in these groups have to have social housing or they'll be homeless. But there's two glitches. Social housing has a wait list of over 18,000 in Vancouver. Plus, and a lot of people don't know this even in Vancouver, most new social housing excludes low-income people. In Vancouver, the definition of social housing is owned by a nonprofit or a government, and 30% of the units rent at the housing income limits, which means basically your income has to be between about 40 and 107K to rent social housing, depending on the number of bedrooms you need. And then 70% of the units are for people that have higher incomes than that. And if you're under 40K, you're hooped. So homelessness isn't just a downtown east side issue, it's in every town in Canada. It's estimated to be about 60,000 precious human beings in Canada. Just in Vancouver, we needed 10,000 units of $500 to $600 a month housing for folks who are homeless. Why is it important to end homelessness? The most important reason, in my opinion, is that folks who are homeless have very hard lives and die early at about 49 on average, according to a Megaphone study. Also, if you're homeless, it's virtually impossible to deal with any physical or mental health or addiction issues. And there's hordes of studies that say it's cheaper to end homelessness than to maintain it. So ending homelessness not only prolongs lives, but it's cheaper for taxpayers. And besides that, no one likes seeing homeless folks on the street. So why do we have so much homelessness? The federal government is the culprit. This 82-year-old can remember when we had hardly any homelessness in Canada back in the 70s. Our government built 12 to 42,000 units of social housing back then, and that was social housing that low-income people could afford. Back then, we also had the Canada Assistance Plan, which meant the feds paid half of provincial welfare and social services costs. So a province could raise welfare and disability, and the feds would kick in half the cost. I was on welfare in the 70s with my kids, and we rented the bottom floor of a house. This stopped in 1996, and the provinces were on their own. Some of them slashed welfare, others didn't increase it with inflation. So we're in the situation we have now where social assistance and hundreds of thousands of people who rely on it have to have social housing or a nice friend or relative with housing, or they're going to be homeless. So I made this list of what our three levels of government are doing about homelessness, and it's pretty depressing. The Vancouver City government paused social housing, doesn't find sites for modulars with expiring leases, is hoping to close about 300 units of SROs on Granville Street when there's no place for the current residents to go, rezoned the downtown east side to reduce the percent of shelter rate housing required in social housing without requiring shelter rate housing in any other social housing outside the downtown east side, and rezoned the downtown east side to allow the 32-story market towers, pushing up property values and making it harder for nonprofits to build social housing. Plus, Project Barrage, putting more police in the downtown east side. What has the provincial government done? Stalled on rebuilding and renovating the Regent and the Balmoral sites, announced new social housing at 301 East Hastings, but haven't actually started building it, froze welfare rates for 180,000 people on social assistance, stress involuntary care as a solution to homelessness. And now there's the recent budget that stopped the Community Housing Fund, the only provincial fund that requires shelter rate housing, while upping spending on police and involuntary care. What has the federal government done? With the Federation of Canadian Municipalities predicting 250,000 homeless by 2030, the feds announced that they'll spend $1 billion over 5 years on housing for people who are homeless, enough to build 2,000 to 4,000 units for the whole country. This announcement of $1 billion for homelessness by the feds is basically sentencing about 60,000 homeless folks to an early death unless we can change it. Meanwhile, federal subsidies to existing social housing are expiring in 2028, and social housing residents are worried they won't be able to afford the new higher rents and will become homeless. So we desperately need allies to pressure the feds in province, but especially the feds, because they've done virtually nothing. One ask that we're exploring is that 2% of the 5% that the federal budget wants to spend on military should go to housing the homeless. We desperately need allies in this fight. So if any of you would like to be allies, you can send us an email at carnegiehousingproject@gmail.com. And what I'd be interested in hearing from the Vienna and Finland especially is how do we create the political will to end homelessness? How do we deal with the fact that there's so many people in our country who are saying homeless people aren't worthy of housing because they do drugs or they made bad choices or they don't want to work? How do we deal with all those myths and get governments to actually put the funds into really ending homelessness? I'd really like some direction on that. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much for that sobering assessment, Jean, and all those facts and figures that you presented that really helped to make the case here, and also your bigger question that you've posed to all of us to frame this as we head into discussion after we finish with our final panelist here, UBC Professor Emeritus Patrick Condon.
Thank you very much, and I want to riff off what Jean just said and go up to 35,000 feet because both at the provincial level here and at the federal level here, and actually at the global level, a fundamental misconception that is driving a lot of this, in my view, is that the reason why we have a housing crisis is because we're not building enough. And there's a lot of authorities who will support that contention. And the policy outcome that results in, whether you're in California or in British Columbia, is to basically get rid of local zoning controls or local controls entirely and insist that housing can be built basically anywhere without permitting at the local level. And the premise here is that this is a problem of supply and demand. It turns out, in my view, clearly, that it's not a problem of supply and demand. What it is, a major driver, which is very unrecognized, is that the driver is the incredible increase in the price of urban land. The asset value of urban land is far in excess now of its use value. Up until basically the 1980s, in the modern period, in the 20th century, second half of the 20th century for sure, the home or the rental was basically, the economics of it was based on its use value. And since it was its use value, it related to average incomes. That's no longer the case. However, the federal government and the provincial government and the national governments and other parts of the world are saying the cure would be simply to build more housing and depending on the market to fix this problem that extends now through the middle class for sure, and even a little bit to the upper middle class in places like Vancouver, where doctors, lawyers, what have you, are feeling housing stress, not to the extent of this, not to the same critical level that Jean was talking about, but certainly, much more of a problem than it was in the past. So I'm going to share my screen here now. I think. Here we go. I presume everybody can see this. This is my latest book on the topic. There's a lot more information in here that I'm going to be able to describe, but it's basically a global look at the same problem that certainly infects the English-speaking world to a very serious extent. And the bottom line of that, it's not the building that costs too much, it's the land under the building that costs too much. Unfortunately, following the recommendation of the federal and provincial government to just add new density into the city doesn't work, because that inflates land price such that there's no benefit to the purchaser or the renter when you look at the final per interior square foot price. So the interior square foot price of a high rise, which is very high density, is about the same as the is about the same as the interior square foot price for a duplex or some kind of detached unit. I apologize. That should help. It's often said that places with a severe crisis have not built enough, and I don't have time to go through all this chart, but at the far left, you see that Vancouver has built more housing than any other center city in North America, by far. If there was a place in North America that should have the cheapest housing, it should be Vancouver. Unfortunately, Vancouver has the most expensive housing in North America when measured against average income. You see other Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York is in here. Their performance in adding supply has been miserable in comparison to ours, and yet their housing is cheaper. This shows you the same information, but with the affordability added in. So the higher your bubble is, the more it costs relative to your income. And the further to the right here you go, the more housing that has been built. And the Canadian cities are shown in red and the American cities are shown in blue. Show you that the correlation is not between adding supply and houses prices go down, both rents and purchase prices go down. The correlation is the reverse. What's driving this? I don't have a neat map like this for Canada, but this is wonderful for the United States. That's by county, and it's showing you the increase in housing price, and it's showing you massive 500% increase in land price, essentially. What this is showing you is metro urban lands now in the United States are $30 trillion in value, by far the highest asset class, which in the fixed asset class, housing is the highest. And it's really urban land, because in places like Vancouver, the urban land value on your assessment bill is often 10 times higher than the value of your home or the building itself. This is proof of what I'm saying. Here's two examples, one a single family home, the other one a higher density building. It shows you the ratio of land price, which is in blue, to the value of the building itself, which is in green. The building itself is inconsequential in value. It's just the land that has value. And unfortunately, that proportion doesn't really change that much as you get into higher density. As you get into higher density, the value of the land itself goes up, not the cheapening of the product. What are you going to do? This is my last slide. Ideal would be if we taxed land instead of income, right? Anybody that owned land should be paying a land tax instead of an income tax. And that would include landlords. And that would drive down the asset value of the land to a point where it would be purchasable at just its use value rather than its asset value. Unfortunately, shifting our shifting our taxing structure throughout the world, which is heavily dependent on income taxes, is unlikely, extremely unlikely politically. There is one thing that is politically possible in our market economies throughout the world, particularly in the English-speaking so-called Anglosphere. You can use public policy's ability to regulate density. When you regulate density, you're also regulating land value. And in the case of Cambridge, Massachusetts, they understood this. It's amazing that very few communities do understand that you can use your local levers of policy or zoning control to say, as they said, you can only get a doubling of density anywhere you want in the city. You can get a doubling of density anywhere you want above what the normal zoning allows for, if in return everything in that house is affordable, everything in that new building is affordable. And the measure for that affordability is median household incomes up to the median, which is the middle of middle class and below. The numbers work out without a taxpayer subsidy when you do that, because it prevents the inflation of land value, which again I have to emphasize, remind you of the slide you just saw that shows when density is increased over time, that value just increases. But at the moment of rezoning, you have the opportunity to insist on social benefit. And you can insist on it in two ways. One way is to say we want cash, and we're going to use that cash to go someplace else. The way they did it in Cambridge was to simply say, you can double density, but in return, the housing has to be permanently affordable relative to whatever the median household income is in our region during that particular decade. So that is the recommendation that I can provide. That unfortunately, it's not widely understood, and the reason why it's not widely understood is because no one acknowledges, very few people acknowledge, that the problem is not that we're preventing housing supply. The problem is that we're not recognizing that urban land price is the driver. Urban land is the asset that everybody is hungry for. And given that hunger globally for urban land value as a place to park wealth, whether you're a single family homeowner or a landlord, doesn't matter. It's really the asset value of the land that you're interested in. It's unfortunate that is not recognized, and it should be. Thank you for your attention to this matter, as Trump says.
Thank you, Patrick, and all our panelists for those very informative opening presentations. I'd like to pivot back now. We're going to circle around and give everybody a brief opportunity to comment on and build on some of the things that you've heard from your fellow panelists. And let's go back across the Atlantic to our European guests here. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on how you might be able to apply some of your solutions that you've developed that have clearly been more effective than what we've been doing over here, based on what you just heard. How could you share some of your insights with our local audience here in terms of building towards solutions? And I'll begin with Juha. And just a couple of minutes here, because I want to get into a roundtable discussion and leave time for that. So we'll go through everybody again briefly.
Thank you, all the other panelists. Great presentations and such great stories and a lot of knowledge in the same webinar. So kudos to you. I highly appreciate everything. And from the Finnish perspective, and I think we heard from our Canadian friends that the price of the land is the biggest factor against building affordable housing. And then I totally agree with some of the points regarding what is actually affordable housing. In Finland, we have have a meaning that, affordable housing is usually, depending on the location, but 40% cheaper versus the market housing. And then hearing the experiences from Canada, even the affordable housing is not affordable enough for some parts of the population, so that can be troublesome. But I think it all comes down to the political will in a way, and I think Jean have a great story regarding that and how to win the political win. And I can share the experience from Finland that winning the political will, sometimes it comes out of pure luck in a way. Because when we started with the Housing First, for example, we had a housing minister from the National Coalition Party, which is leading heavily on the right side of the political spectrum, especially when it comes to finances. But the housing minister had a vision. He believed that housing is a human right for sure, deep down in his heart. But the main thing for him was that he understood that when we take care of the most vulnerable people in the societies, we are creating better society and cities for everyone. And he saw an opportunity there to also save society's money. So at the end of the day, it played out. But I think we need these kind of people, and we need to seek the different political spectrums from right to left, from center to both of these directions. And then, we can find some surprising players on the field. And sometimes it only takes that one political champion. That's what happened in Finland. It was the right time, right place, right man to do the job, to be honest. And yeah. And he retired from the politics last year, and there was a big news story on the biggest newspaper in Finland about him. And then there was a question, what is the biggest achievement of your lengthy political career? And he said, creating the Housing First. And then that stood out for me, and that's still the biggest thing he or the political party has done in Finland.
Thank you very much, Juha. I'd love to hear from Martin here as well. Clearly, there has been more political will for these policies in Austria. What do you think are the conditions that have created that possibility politically within your country to do the kind of work that you're carrying on?
Yeah, you have to see that these achievements are mainly achievements of the past. There have been historical conditions under which these achievements were possible. But today we face similar problems like everybody else. The only thing Austria didn't do was, like a few other European countries, to abolish all these systems. So we just kept them alive a little bit. That, of course, was also a matter of political will. But what I think is that there are good arguments to change this political will, because Jean asked what can we do to change this political will, and I will try to deliver some arguments about it. The first thing is homelessness is not an individual problem, it's a structural problem. Of course, it's not easy to transmit, but I think we have to make clear that it's not the individual failure of somebody who is an alcoholic or a drug abuser or something else, and that's why he's homeless. No, in a society where housing is a human right, nobody should have to be homeless. And if it happens, then it's a structural problem and not individual failure. So that's the first thing. The second is very simple. Preventing homelessness is cheaper for the taxpayer than dealing with homelessness. We see this especially in eviction prevention programs. And the third thing is when we say housing is a human right and we take it seriously and build dwellings for all people and not only for the poorest, then everybody profits from fighting homelessness. And then it's a program for almost everybody, maybe not for the upper 10 or 20%, but for big parts of the rest of society. And it makes life better for almost everybody. And I think that should be a very strong argument to work on changing the political will. And one last point, maybe I really want to support Patrick's argument about not building enough. That's he is completely right. That's not true. We have seen it in Vienna too. We have had a housing boom during the last 10 years, more or less. We have built more apartments than ever in the city, and prices have gone up dramatically. So building of expensive apartment is, and of course it's connected with land policy, and this is the reason for expensive housing and not the cure.
Thank you, Martin. So it sounds like overcoming some of these popular misconceptions in the public perception or the public sphere and the political sphere is going to be an important part of this. I just want to remind our viewers that you can and encourage you to submit your questions for the upcoming question period here in the chat, and we'll sort those out and pass them on to our panelists. Tina, you mentioned a couple of things in your comments that sort of build on what was just mentioned here. One is the limitations of local government when you're basically operating within the framework imposed on you by provincial policy, and Gina has alluded to also the role that the federal government has to play in here, which they are not playing. And so your hands are somewhat tied, but you found ways of working within those constraints. And you also spoke about overcoming. You didn't use the word NIMBYism, but I think that is something that you encountered perhaps in the East Keith project, where you had local residents who didn't want to see that affordable housing built, perhaps because they worried it might lower local land values in their own kind of narrow self-interest there. Maybe you could speak to. So you went ahead with that project. Council voted in favor of it, but you had to weigh those local concerns and overcome that kind of inertia within the fellow landowners, with individual landowners in the region. So how do you deal with those things at the municipal level?
Great, thanks, Damien. Well, it was really hard at the public hearing, just to look at this example on East Keith, to hear so many different views, and views that were really against the project. And I think it's really important to like remember that these are all people who are coming out, spending the time, being brave enough to come and say what they like, what they don't like. And council has to listen, and staff listens. I will say that you're right. Some of the concerns that people shared were, I'm going to be afraid to walk down the street to the park if this building of homeless individuals is built. I'm afraid there's going to be drug use. I'm afraid my kids will never be able to get to Bridgman Park. My property values will go down. And I think part of responding to that is being able to provide some data and evidence, and that does happen. There was some information done after a number of temporary modular housing projects were built around Metro Vancouver that showed crime rates did not go down. Some of the investments in supportive services for individuals who would live in the building, how that can reduce costs, reduce hospital calls, emergency visits, etc. People aren't always really ready to hear that. And I think one of the questions that's kind of floating in the chat is around, and has been said, how do we change that political support? And honestly, I think sometimes it takes time, and it will take experience with buildings to see that things can be, might be okay, might be better than we think. We've got excellent housing providers for that East Keith project. It's the Luma Native Housing Society that will be the operator. A lot of experience. Important to have good dialogue once that building is built with the community, and they do this as a matter of course, and we want to build on that. And maybe I'll just share a story from another project that I mentioned briefly, West 16th. When that was going through the public process, some little old ladies got up and they said, "We are the little old ladies of Norgate, and we really look forward to this project because we hope that we can come and do some support and knitting and cooking with the women who are going to live in this building." So I think it takes time, and it takes being open to change. And I think people are nobody said they don't support individuals who need housing and support getting that. It'll take some time and experience.
Thank you, Tina. Gene, you said, I think quite aptly earlier that it's not that we don't know what should be done, it's that we don't have the political will to do it. You are clearly armed with some very persuasive data and arguments that make a lot of sense when they come from you here in this forum today. How do we break through this inertia, both in terms of the general public, but also the political will issue here to move us towards doing the right thing?
Yeah, well, that's the question that I need help answering. It seems like logic and reason don't provide enough motivation. I think a lot of it is prejudice against people who are homeless. I don't know how we deal with that. Um, and a lot of it is political opportunism of certain politicians who are exploiting um, the discrimination against low income and homeless people and people who use drugs. Like when Pierre Poilievre went down to Crab Park and when they had the tent city and did a video of it. Um, yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I'm working on trying to get a whole bunch of folks together from different groups across the country who will basically call out the federal government for its unbelievably measly contribution towards homelessness after having caused the problem in the first place, and to see if maybe if we get a whole batch of groups pushing on it, it could help. But I have, as a city councilor a few years ago, I have been at those public hearings where people come and say, oh, we can't have this supportive housing building in my neighborhood. What about the children? And it's like, it's not going to hurt the children. But how do you tell them that? I don't know. I don't know how people, I don't know how that's done. And if someone can tell me, I'm all ears.
Seems to me that lower income people have children too, and that they're being affected by record levels of hunger and low quality of life in British Columbia, and they're disproportionately affected by these policies. So, if people care about the children, maybe we should care about this social safety net that encompasses housing.
And if you have kids and you walk down the street and there's a person using drugs on the street, I would tell my kid, oh, there's a person using drugs. They're in a really bad situation. Maybe we can bring them some food next time we come by and give them, help them out a little bit, or a warm blanket or something. Uh, it's a perfect chance for education. It's not a chance for being fearful.
Well, and it seems like the fear, and I'm sorry, I guess getting ahead of ourselves into discussion here, but you're prompting that with these comments that you're making. The fear is holding us back from the solutions, which then becomes this kind of vicious circle. Because if we use that fear if that inhibits action, the action that would be the solution to the underlying problem, then we're just making the problem worse. And then there's more things to be, more situations to be fearful of. And we don't build the housing that we need and the systems that we need to support folks. So we're just falling further and further behind. I'll maybe just hand it off to Patrick here to, circle back on anything that you've heard here, and then we're going to carry on with this discussion that that's starting to build organically here. Patrick.
Well, I want to riff off the idea that we know the problem, but the political will is lacking. Taking a somewhat different tack, I actually don't think we understand the problem at all because of the confusion about supply and demand and the idea that we would solve the problem, maybe not down to the level of homelessness, but pretty close, is what they contend, if we just built more housing, just built more housing. And I'm not a real estate economist, and I get attacked all the time. Attack might be too strong a word, criticized all the time or dismissed all the time by my colleagues up at UBC who are real estate economists, who are they're all in on the idea that this is a supply problem, just add supply. And most of the experts internationally will also say that, which is really blocking solutions to a problem which actually has an easy solution, I think. The Cambridge example is an easy solution. We could do that Monday. We could just say no additional density unless a certain percentage is affordable. I like 50%. 30% of median income and below would be so easy to do, and it's something that we have the legislative authority, or we did until the province stepped in and said, no, you don't. But largely, local municipalities have that power, which is a zoning authority, to say, yeah, you can have additional density, but in return for these new land rights, nobody owns land, they own land rights. That's particularly true in urban situation. You don't own the land, you actually own the right to use the land in a certain way. And who delegates those rights? The city delegates those rights. That's a common police power throughout the Anglosphere. Every country has the same, and it's not too different in the EU, as far as I know, to actually ask for social benefit return as a consequence uh, of new land rights. So I want to end by sort of giving you the overarching economics of all this. This is not really a left versus right question, because the source of what I'm talking about dates back to Adam Smith, who was the first one to say uh, there are three elements of production. They are capital, labor, and land. And he went on to say, of those three, the only one that is parasitic is land. In other words, he went on to say that if you don't watch out, all the value created by the workers and the capitalists above the surface of the dirt are going to go into the pockets of the landlord. And for various reasons in the 20th century, stuff happened, and that fell to the wayside. So we've forgotten that reality, but that reality is returning with a vengeance now, that all of our civic betterment efforts, all of our jobs, all of the work of entrepreneurs ends up going into land price, or what is technically called land rent. So that's a real problem over which we actually have the authority to do something about. The public at the local level gives away land rights, and we get to ask those people who get those new land rights for social benefit in return, because those rights are owned by the public. That's just democracy. That's just the way it works at the local level. So I end up being quite astonished that even my esteemed colleagues at the University of British Columbia and elsewhere throughout the world do not get that. And certainly all the people that listen to them, which is usually the market developers, are very, very anxious to promulgate that fiction that our problem will be solved if we just build more housing. The problem is lack of supply. Of course, the development community really loves to hear that, because it works to their advantage, and God love them. Building the building is civically useful, but for this proportion of value going into just the land as an asset is a real problem. So
It's
Sorry.
interesting. You're laying some of the blame here at the feet of your fellow academics, and it's interesting to me that we think of academia as being very data and evidence driven and peer reviewed, and we would expect, of course, developers and politicians to roll with these ideas because they're in their self interest, particularly developers. But we have a problem here when academics are. You've laid out some very clear data. Your research is compelling, and yet what you're hearing from some academics who are providing the intellectual cover, I guess you could say, is almost a religious dogma more than it is an academic philosophy here.
It definitely is. And Thomas Piketty, the great economist from France, basically says economic theories are basically justification for a regime of inequality of one sort or another, and that includes communism, all the way to libertarianism. And I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but what happened after our good friend Adam Smith in the economics of the Anglosphere, for sure. I want to throw a couple of labels in here in answer to your question.
Yeah.
His view of those three elements of production and the problem of land is called classical economics. But the world we live in globally now is neoclassical economics. And that shift occurred in the late 19th century, largely promoted, and this isn't conspiracy, this is the historical record, particularly in the United States. During the Gilded Era, when most of the money was being made in land, but in those days it was railroad barons who also owned half of the country and then also ended up being associated with the landlord class in the major cities, fought very hard against this conception that land is parasitic and it ought to be taxed. They have conflated now, and my colleagues at the University of British Columbia are largely in this category. Land and capital have been conflated as being presumably both productive rather than land being parasitic. And given that fundamental premise, they're inadequate, or it makes it impossible for them to even discuss what I'm talking about here, because the paradigm of neoliberalism globally prevents that conversation from occurring. So it's stunning to me that, something as simple as what Cambridge has done to really reach down into the demographic income cohort almost to the poverty level is achievable without asking for taxpayer dollars that would otherwise just go into the pockets of land speculators. The ones who are getting rich, I tell my students this. I say, if you really just want to get rich rather than save the world, become a land speculator. Don't become a developer, because that's very risky. But land speculation is no risk, and you make a lot of money because that's where the money is.
Right. I want to keep this moving here. Thank you very much, Patrick. I want to pull back with our other panelists here to the idea of, we know, you illustrated this beautifully earlier, that there is a strong business case for doing the right thing here. It's not just a humanitarian case. We can see in Vancouver, for example, I don't think anybody is really comfortable with the amount of homelessness that they see in the downtown east side and well beyond that throughout the region. We know you've laid a business case out here, Juha, for the public that it makes the right. It makes sense. It makes good business sense for the taxpayer to invest in affordable housing, that you save money, thousands of euros per person that you remove from the street or from homelessness. And yet we're trapped in this narrow self-interest of, we understand that, of course, real estate developers are going to pursue their own interests, but how do we as a society create the conditions politically where we are advocating for our broad socioeconomic best interest in addressing these issues? And I'll put that out to everyone here, and then we're going to move into questions. We're not bound by an hour and a half. You're already coming up on that. I want to carry this conversation on, and if people need to go, that's okay, but we will have time for questions from the audience. So I'll put that out to all of you. How do we match the political reality with our social, or what is clearly a social interest of everyone here?
Well, I can say that, regarding the discussion that has been going on regarding the drug usage and substance abuse and mental health challenges, I have been roaming around the globe for the past 4 years, more or less. I have been in the Canada for 4 times, and US many times, and all over Europe, and I have met hundreds, maybe thousands of formerly homeless people and currently homeless people, and have discussed with them. And rarely anyone says that the cause they are homeless is because of drugs or mental health challenges. It's the consequence of on when they are on the streets. And one man, it was actually in Toronto, I had a lovely discussion with him, and he said that he challenges each and every politician to come live on the streets for 6 months and see how they are doing after that. Are they using any substances, or how is their mental health situation? So usually that's not the reason, it's the consequence. And then I think in Canada you have a really good pilot project going on. I'm sure some of you have heard Dr. Andrew Moosery from the hospital network. And then in Toronto, what they have done in his hospital is that they have taken a piece from the parking lot and built permanent supported housing for 52 homeless people there. So the doctors can actually describe housing for the homeless people. And there have been a lot of news stories in the media all around Toronto and Ontario province regarding this, because they are already now seeing the changes of the people. They are no longer using the emergency services in the hospitals. They don't end up having so much contact with the police officers. They don't end up jail as often. And they are already within 1 year, they are seeing huge savings of taxpayers' money. But of course, the main thing here is that they can actually house these people who otherwise would be wandering around the streets before they're back on the emergency center. So I think you have the solutions building up in Canada as well. And now I think it's time to scale those things, which is always the tricky part for sure.
The floor is open to any of our other panelists to respond to this question.
Maybe I'll jump in there, Damien. Thanks for sharing that example, Juha. I wasn't aware of it. I think people will, when we have shared some of the data about the benefits and why aren't we just all believing that and wanting to do the right thing? I think that data I've seen is questioned, or it's, claimed to not be sound data. So I think there's, dialogue, the ways to continue to have that conversation, maybe with our community here. Maybe this happens when one of our projects is underway or is built. I really do think the more we know about each other, and that might sound kind of lofty, but if we don't know what the other person's experience, or we live our lives, we're all living the lives that we live, and we don't all have the opportunity to kind of see how the other side lives and to understand them. And I think sharing some of those stories, like the story of James from the North Shore Neighborhood House, more of that, I really hope can help people to open their minds and be more willing to take a chance with a housing option, for example.
Jean, you identified a problem. I've known this for years myself. Under the Chrétien government, they pulled out this core federal responsibility of being involved in housing, and they have the resources. When you look at the tax dollars, they flow first and foremost in the pyramid. I remember Jane Jacobs, one of her books, she identified something like 60+% of our tax dollars go to the federal government, 30 something to the province, and 8% roughly to the municipalities. So if the resources are concentrated at the federal level, and clearly we have homeless people migrate to Vancouver from across the country because they don't die in the winter when they're on the street necessarily here, where they might in Winnipeg. And this seems like a national problem. So how do we put this on the agenda? How do we move the federal government back into doing what they need to do or should be doing? What was their historical responsibility that they've clearly abdicated, and that these other levels of government just simply do not have the resources or capacity to solve on their own?
Yeah, you're right that municipalities in particular don't have the taxing power to deal with homelessness. When I was on council, I put forward the idea of having a mansion tax where we could have a higher rate of tax on expensive mansions than we had on like a cheap condo, but it requires provincial approval and they wouldn't give it. Yeah, so our federal government has just decided that they want to spend 5% of GDP on the military. So that's why we were thinking maybe if we could try and snatch 2% of that for housing, and we could have a huge buildup of housing using Canadian wood, Canadian factories for modular, Canadian workers. It could be an anti-tariff thing. That would be good. The feds have a lot more taxing power than any other level of government in Canada. And yeah, but it's just how do we create the political will to do that? There's a great podcast I put in the chat called Policy Crimes that has 4 or 5 academics, each one talking about how it's cheaper to end poverty than end homelessness than maintain it.
Martin, before we get into questions, I'm going to hand the last comment to you here. And you alluded to the idea that political will, although it has been there historically in Austria to a greater degree than what we've had here in Canada, clearly, and in the Lower Mainland, that's not a given, and that it's slipping back in the other direction now. Despite all the success that you've had and the popularity that this has been good for economically and socially for your country as it has for Finland. And yet we see the trends turning around in Finland a little bit. As Juha alluded to, we're slipping back in the other direction. He commented on the same thing. So what do you envision doing within your country to ensure that you bring the political will back to continue this good work that you've been doing for the last couple decades?
Yeah, what we intend to do is to do simply research and to show results, and for example, show what mechanism on the housing market work, what this land rent concept means for housing production, for housing costs, and also what I think is that the opinion in the media and the opinion of the people is very different in housing topics. So we will do some research on this issue. We will ask simply the people what measures do they want? Do they want regulated rent or not? Do they want more social housing or less? And things like that. Because what I think is that there are big majorities in the population for measures like this. But on the other hand, there's this neoliberal agenda and the propaganda for the real estate lobby and things like that. And I think we have to show that there's the will of the majority and there's the interest of the few. And to make these things public, I think is the first step to turn things around again.
Yeah, it seems like obviously these vested interests are going to articulate effectively for themselves with their lobbies, with their work in the media. They can do very sophisticated public relations and put their agenda across. And so it's an uphill battle for people doing the kind of work that you are to keep that message in the public sphere and motivate politicians. So. On that note, I want to. Oh yeah, go ahead. You have one.
Yeah, may I add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
also what Patrick mentioned, that we also have these discussions with conservative economists who tell us just it's a supply problem, just build more apartments. And what we are going to do is doing research on these issues and show that it's simply not true, and to try to prove that. And we will also try to prove that housing costs and competitiveness of our economy are very much related, and all these things, and put different perspectives on this issue, and so try to show another picture in public of all these things.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to hand this over to Gary. I know we're a little bit behind time. We'll give ourselves another 15 minutes here top, so people we won't go past. We'll be done before 11 o'clock here. So, but we've got some questions to work through, and I'll ask everyone to keep their answers fairly brief so that we can move through some of these questions from our audience. And I thank everyone for their patience. Gary, the baton is yours.
Yeah, thanks very much, Damon. Excellent presentation, everyone. I really enjoyed listening to this. And we've got lots of questions. If you're following the chat, you've seen a lot of back and forth there as well. Simon sent us a question. How do we, and you've covered off on a lot of this in recent comments that have been made in the session, how do we win and build a wave of public support? Is there one thing you think needs to happen to win this battle?
You know, my view is it takes a paradigm shift, which is unlikely but necessary. That's all I'll say.
Any other comments then? Or? Sorry, Damon.
I don't know if
Yeah.
it's just one thing. It might be more than one. I kind of liked Martin's idea of, it made me think maybe we could get somebody to do a poll. And if the answer came back and ask a question like, do you think it would be good if we could end homelessness? Knowing that it's cheaper and it'll help people live longer and things like this, and then come up with the results and say, oh yeah, 90% of the people think it would be good. Maybe that would be a helpful thing to do. Thank you,
I think
Martin.
it might be interesting to share some of these success stories from, through the general public here, which we're doing here today. We're beginning that with the Canada West Forum right now, but the idea that it's possible seems to be an important concept. And there is a cynicism, I think, about this issue that I've observed. I remember when Gregor Robertson came in as the mayor of Vancouver and promised to end homelessness. That was like 20 years ago or something. I don't have the number in front of me, but and we had a new council. They had a lot of vim and vigor to come in here, and it got worse over time, and it's continued to slide. It doesn't matter whether we have sort of a progressive leaning or progressive branded municipal council in power or a more conservative one. The trends seem to be the same, and I think that people maybe just have gotten cynical about the possibility. And when I hear these success stories like Finland, and you see that beautiful chart that went from about 30-year period, I recall, that went from 18,000 down to 4,000, and that you pretty much got to the point of eliminating homelessness. That's amazing. And I don't know that many people in BC or in Vancouver think that that's even possible. So maybe we need to remind them that that it can be done, and it has been done, and there are ways to do this.
I maybe add there, Damien, I think taking those wins when they happen, every person who gets a permanent home, every one of those 65 units that will come in a building, for example, I think those are stories to be proud about, because that paradigm shift that, as Patrick said, that is needed and may never happen, like that can be really discouraging. So the little successes to keep everybody's fire going, to keep doing work, and many on this call have been doing this work for a long time. So a big change, but also those little changes can add up over time.
I don't want to come off as totally pessimistic. What could be done in BC and other jurisdictions, and I want to say that depending on the federal level, to do this is a little bit wrong-headed anyway. But it would be good if the federal level would just stop doing the wrong thing. And the federal level is putting more money, more of their housing money, 90% of their housing money is going to support market projects, market rental projects at this time that will be owned privately by a landlord. So, and that's based on the premise that we have a supply problem. And if we just add additional housing units, the prices would go down, which is very, very false. But at the local level, we do have this ability to ask for certain conditions to be met as a consequence of basically permitting. And even though I bemoan the new legislation that the province has put forward, it did not preclude, in the process of adding all this new supply, for asking for social benefit. Now, there is a political problem because currently the presumption is that represents a tax, and that's just going to make prices higher. No, it doesn't. It just makes land prices lower, you see? So I think there might be an opportunity to convince the body politic against the weight of the Urban Development Institute or, land speculators. They're very powerful. Uh, and that is a problem. Against the weight of their influence, which is huge, there is a possibility that could be reversed by saying, no, in return for new density, you have to do this. Okay. And if that doesn't work, don't build. Don't build. And the consequences of that are not on the developer, it's not on the renter, it's not on the homeowner. The consequence of that is on the land speculator.
We try and do that. Many jurisdictions are either giving more density to include affordable housing. There are other ways that we can do it in British Columbia without giving density away by requiring a certain amount of affordable units, and we define what they are. My colleagues, some I think who are on this call, are probably wanting to talk about this inclusionary zoning, which means, for example, every new apartment building must include 10% of its residential floor area as affordable. And we've studied it, had economic analysis that say that affordability level should be 20% below the median rent in our area. We've had public workshops on this. We also have to make sure that it's economically viable, and that's right now a hard part. So we're kind of at that point where our council, for example, has talked about this and has interest, community does. Still, we're required to make sure that it's viable and to study that, and we're kind of in the middle of that work. So I agree that is a possibly a very, very good route forward, just not right at this moment for us.
Yeah, I just want to commend Tina and your group for going for that. And where it always falls down is that economic viability thing, because the economic viability, the people who are your consultants who are going to tell you whether it's economically viable or not are going to not mention the fact that they're assuming this very high land price as a condition of economic viability. So there's a breach in the logic that is happening in all these communities when we're saying, oh, maybe we can afford 10%, but we can't afford 50%, which is my recommendation, 50%. And my numbers say you can do that because that will maintain or even lower a land price. The consequence of that is it slows down the development in the area, which people object to. You touched on that, Tina. Nobody wants to slow development. So given the context of these land prices, if you assume you have to keep developing, then your analysis of what is possible to deliver through a density bonus, inclusionary zoning, is affected by that. And therein lies the problem. So my recommendation for the whole world, not just North Vancouver, is it would be great politically if at the local level you got tough and you say, if it doesn't get built, it doesn't get built, or it doesn't get built this year. Nothing's getting built this year because the whole global real estate market has collapsed. So nothing is getting built. So that's not your problem. Your problem is really to regulate land value by assigning land rights in return for social benefit. And that has an influence on land price. It does not have an influence on the price of rent or the price of a new home.
If I could just step in for a second, Damien. There's two related questions here. One of them is pretty specific. One of the people in the audience asked Patrick, is there much Crown civic land available in the Lower Mainland that can be used for affordable housing projects? And an ancillary to that is another point. The local government in British Columbia collectively have $27 billion in cash in the bank right now. Is local government the source of fundamental change at this time? And if not, what is the role of local government in affordable housing issues?
Yeah, well, if that's a question to me, I think local government is completely underappreciated in terms of the levers of affordability power that they have, because you cannot build a building without local approval of various types. And it is legal for local government to say, hey, this is our city. We don't build anything here unless my rule, half of it is affordable to normal people, middle class and below. And I think that is a local responsibility. That is a local power that we have.
Maybe I'll come to that question around Crown land. We often ask that, our councils want to ask that. Should we be using our underutilized vacant land? What about the province? What about the federal government? And typically, I would say generally the answer is no, there's not a lot of Crown. Well, there may not always be a lot of Crown land that's available, or that senior governments might have themselves earmarked for some other purpose. It was not that long ago when the federal government said that they were making certain federal lands available for housing, and we were like, okay, where? Oh, there was one post office, old post office, and that was kind of it. So kind of a general comment about that land. I know people often will say, like, there's so much land in Canada, why can't you do all these things and build bike routes everywhere and build housing? But it's more complex, obviously.
Yeah, it's urban land that we lack. It's not forested land that we lack, it's urban land. And the value of urban land is a consequence of urban activity. Going back to Adam Smith, urban activity is where all the wealth is generated. And that goes into the private land in cities. So that's the nature of the problem. Big country with a lot of land, that doesn't help because, it's like Jesse James says, he was asked, why do you rob banks? And he says, well, that's the way the money is. It's the same situation. Urban land is where the money is. And unfortunately, almost all of our urban land is privately owned. There are some parcels that are available that should be used, and that will get around the land price problem. Good, let's do that Monday. Start there. We could probably put out 10,000 units if we just did that. Maybe 5,000 in the city of Vancouver. It's just not a lot of land that's available. The more elegant device, I think, is to just use a policy lever. You don't build on your private land unless you do thus and so.
Gary, did you have some more questions from the audience?
Yes, there are quite a few, but it's very hard to take some of the questions, comments, and put them into a form that is going to ask everybody to participate at this stage. So maybe I should just relinquish it back to you for the last 5 or 10 minutes, Damien. I'm sorry if I'm missing somebody's key question that they wanted to have heard, but I think with where we've gone with this process, I think it's brilliant that we've covered so many different aspects, and we'll go from there. I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, I did want to circle back, and we've been talking a fair amount about uh, municipal zoning controls and here around levers that can be pulled in terms of development permitting. What about provincially and federally funded or built purpose-built rental housing units, stock, getting that into the system? Even if that doesn't involve pre-existing crown land, what if it's purchasing land from developers with tax dollars and building government-owned housing? There used to be a lot of that built back in the day, as far as I know, and there's less of that happening today. Are we relying too much on some sort of hybrid solution with the private sector that the private sector is going to continue to resist because it's they just want to build more market housing? Is there a role for the government in that regard?
If I may jump in here, yes, I think that's it's very right. That's a really valid point. We have not only in Austria but in many other countries in Europe, we have had publicly funded or publicly owned systems. We had a very big public housing system in the UK. It was destroyed by Thatcher. But it was, I think, as far as I'm informed, the best we had in Europe. We had very good systems in Germany, the Netherlands, in Sweden, and so on. Most of them were either destroyed or reduced. Yeah? But we have this historical experience that state intervention helps. It made housing affordable. It made good quality housing. We had good running systems, but they were destroyed in the interest of people who wanted to earn money with land. And so we have to step back a little bit. That's also why I showed you this historic example of the Red Vienna, but there are other examples in Europe or in other areas of the world too. And we have to, of course, we have to modernize these systems, and we have to find new approaches and new financing models and so on. But the basic principle is this: it's a task of the state to provide for decent housing. And so, of course, it's one way to go, to have the state build these apartments and to provide for decent housing for the people.
I'll throw it out to anybody, any of the other panelists who want to make any final comments on that subject or any other. We'll just wrap this up in the next minute or two.
I'm good. Thanks everybody for all the info and insights.
I got a last comment, and that's that, if land was free, the market could deliver affordable housing at about, for a 2 or 3 bedroom house apartment, for between $1,500 a month and $2,000 a month. That's current Canadian economics, Canadian cash. And that brings everything down to median income and slightly below. So that's pretty good. That's like a 50% improvement over what we have now. So if you could deal with the land price problem and conceptually imagine land is free, even though it's not, we don't have an affordable housing problem. It could be built and maintained for normal rents made by people whose incomes was normal middle-class incomes. So I hope that the listeners can hold that in their head.
Thank you, Patrick. Tina, did you have any final comments?
Just in summary, I really appreciated hearing, examples, tangible examples and work from, from Martin and Juha, and the bigger economic question. And Jean is always an advocate and a hero in looking for solutions. So local government is one part of it. We generally, don't build or own municipal public housing, but we know that we play a really important role with partnership with other partners to keep chipping away at the problem.
Well, I just want to conclude by saying thank you to all our panelists, especially our transatlantic guests here for staying up a little later here. We're in the morning time on our side of the world, but thank you, Martin, and to Juha, who I believe I have to lead a little earlier, and to our local contributors. What a wonderful discussion, and I hope that there's a legacy from the recording that's going to be created from this, and that it can be shared with policymakers and the public as we continue this important work of tackling this problem, which affects our economy and our society, and is really just a fundamental humanitarian issue of our time, that of creating more affordable housing for everyone. I want to thank Norm Farrell and the whole Canada West Forum team for putting this together for us, and we'll say goodbye until the next forum. Stay tuned at the Canada West Forum website. Thank you very much, everyone.